Good afternoon and welcome to our workshop this April 27th. We are going to, because we do have another meeting at 6 and we have limited time for this workshop, very important workshop, we are going to leave the public input for the 6 p.m. public hearing and ask staff to go ahead and present the factual information we need to make a decision tonight. So Dr. Moxley?
Yes, thank you very much, board members. What we'd like to do this afternoon for this particular workshop, there's 2 items, and these items are coming back to you for further clarification from our last board meeting that we had last Monday. And there was discussion from the strategic finance plan regarding one particular position in that. We heard a lot of conversation from the board members on that. We have gone back, and Mrs. Hobart is here tonight, and I'm going to ask her to come forward. And as she is coming forward, let me just give you a little bit more information that Mrs. Hobart went back with the team. They looked at it. They considered all the conversations. I believe where we landed on that is that we want to make sure that the board clearly understands our philosophy in working with the team, that and I think we do have agreement on where we want to go and where we want to be at the end of the day. We are striving to put together a model and a framework that provides administrative support and to prepare and have all people leading in our schools that are at that highly effective range, and that we do agree that principals have the job and the responsibility to develop their assistant principals that are in their employ at that assignment and to make them ready to be high-performing principals. And with that same line of thinking, that the principal evaluators, who at this point in time happen to be our chiefs, and in some cases our director of elementary curriculum, because she has also been a principal in past responsibilities and is qualified to evaluate. She does evaluate, but the number of ratios are very, very high. Since our chiefs are also principal evaluators, they're also running a whole division of direct reports, that those ratios are still too high, and the amount of time to be able to, through the evaluation process, do that principal development for the principal development of the leadership AP development, that in the big picture where we're talking about, we want to get to where we have that area superintendent concept, if you will, where we are very honed in through that evaluation process, providing that direction, that connection, and that development process, and not have a separate entity that is only induction. We all agreed that that probably wasn't a full-time position, that there was always the end result that would be through the evaluation process. So that has gone back. They have tweaked that to pick up that leadership component, that position, and I believe Mrs. Hobart will walk you through that. This is our step in getting to the next level of moving towards that area superintendent concept. We are not large enough, but we're right at that point. St. Lucie County, I looked at their organizational chart. They're in the same enrollment numbers that we are. They have actually moved to 2 executive directors. That's what they do, is they're responsible to the schools, and they report to a chief position or an assistant superintendent, but 2 executive directors, and they've divided up to, that's what they do, is what we're proposing to do with the 1, but still keep the chiefs, but lower that ratio down, because we cannot afford to move to more than 1 at this point in time. So we would be able to do that nicely, but this is in the big picture. Brevard County also does an area superintendent. They have 3 area superintendents. Volusia County has 4 area superintendents. Pinellas County does 4 area superintendents, but then they have a larger ratio number because of the scope and the size of that district. But again, I believe when we hit about 44,000 students, that we will be large enough that we will actually need to have that type area superintendent model. But right now we're just on that brink, so this is a step in that bigger picture. So, Mrs. Hobart.
So attached to your board docs for this workshop, you have an edited version of what I shared with you a week ago on Monday. It says edited version, and you will find strikeouts and additions based on the changes Dr. Moxley referred to. For our work today, I've given you a 4-page handout that's the core of those changes, so we can look at that easily together. So the changes that we're talking about are to the principal induction and development instructional priority, and that's what we had titled it originally. It was interesting to listen to your dialogue and to dialogue a bit with you last week, because I think what I realized was much of what you were saying we already had talked about in the mix of this position. But when I looked at how things were labeled and also at how they were described, you know, the explicit laying down of detail, it wasn't detailed so you could see that. And so what we're putting forward makes more explicit what actually was going on in concept, and which you fleshed out and supported at the workshop. So that was kind of interesting to me, just being part of that discussion. So if you could look at the handout that I gave you, we've titled this instructional priority Leadership Advancement, which is much broader than Principal Induction and Development. You'll notice that for the goals, we have added the creating training and protocols that establish succession planning and pathway to school leadership advancement for assistant principals and teacher leaders. It's putting together that whole structure leading to the principalship and making that really a solid advancement. It talks about improving the level of leadership advancement opportunities, supporting assistant principals, principals, and district level leaders. So it does the whole gamut of leadership support. And then ensuring that principals receive in-depth support during the first 2 years of being in place. We do believe those first 2 years are critical, and if we can boost that capability of a principal by 1 or 2 years in terms of advancing their capability for effectively working with their schools, that will bring results in terms of the whole school's performance. You'll notice upcoming milestones add in completing a plan for principal, assistant principal, and district leadership advancement. Lead the planning and development of protocols for principal succession and assistant principal development, and examining the pathway to leadership, which is our formal pathway to the principalship, and preparing recommendations for enhancement. On the next page, you'll see that the title of the job has changed from Principal and Special Assignment to Director of Leadership. For the board meeting, these edits are in this document, but without the strike-throughs in it. So the edits are actually in that document for item 8.10. Then if we look at the job description, which is also on the agenda for tonight, you'll notice the change from Principal and Special Assignment to Director of Leadership, the title. This emphasizes, as you would skim through the points, what Dr. Moxley talked about, supervising and evaluating a cohort of principals aligned to the LEADS process, our evaluation process, developing standard operating procedures to support a succession system for principals, developing and implementing a long-term strategic plan and standard operating procedures for leadership development for assistant principals, principals, and district leadership, coordinating and continuing to develop the district's pathway to school leadership program for teacher leaders and assistant principals. It brings in the assistant principals as well as the district leaders into a full leadership support model. And it does talk about coaching early career principals in leadership as well. It maintains that. So I would certainly take any questions or comments.
And just for clarification, Mrs. Hobart, you know how we have in this in the strategic plan, we had the work plan that had the instructional priority of the talent development pipeline.
Yes.
And that showed how teachers and the progression therein, and they got to that teacher leadership continuum. And is this meant to pick up from there and take it all the way up through that succession planning, or how do they fit together?
It's meant to interface with
Okay.
that. So on our talent development pipeline, we have the teacher advancement, and then there's a leadership academy, a set of courses and protocols that will be developed this year to move into. Then a person can move to teacher leader, district teacher leader, or into the administrative area. That administrative area would be where this would function. It would take over once this middle point was developed of leadership. I'm not sure about the interface. Those things have to be worked out. This is a new
Okay.
system set up, but I would picture that it would take over or be part of that. It would be part of that, but then extend beyond that.
But it connects to that
Yes,
administrative
absolutely.
track.
Yes, absolutely. It's meant to do that.
Okay, board members, questions, comments? Okay.
And this is for information only. This is on the agenda in the regular meeting where you would be taking action. So this was not meant at this moment in time for an action.
No, I just wanted to make sure, because I wasn't at the last meeting, that you got all your questions answered. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is to provide additional information that was requested by board members related to Lake Minneola High School and the boundary recommendations. And board members, if you'll recall, at our last meeting, and I know Mrs. Stuyvesant, that's one where you were not in attendance and out of state at that moment. But at that particular meeting, one of the items that took place is that Mr. Mathias handed out some information to the board for their information, and in conversation with staff did put documents in place with that information, labeled it option 12 so that we were not trying to overlay one option over the other, that we gave it a separate labeling, so option 12, and put it in the same format and drew the map so that you would have contextually option 12 in the same format and the same structure that you had the other options that have previously been discussed through this entire ABC process. I want to go back and just make sure we're connecting all from the same starting point with the same information. There's been a lot of information out there in a lot of different forms, some in news stories through the paper and television news reports. There have been Facebook commentaries. There have been blog commentaries. There's been a whole lot of information and dialogue out there. And a lot of that is taken from meetings where people have sat through, or interpretations or opinions and that type of thing. So that we're up here starting with the same vantage point and the same understandings and the same chronology. And certainly there's some clarification, and certainly any other questions that you might need to have. I want to make sure that you all have the same information to make the best informed decision, whatever that may be tonight at the end of the day. If you'll remember, and two board members, you weren't sitting on this board at this time. This was pre the November election. But the discussion and the issue that had come to the table was Lake Minneola High School was overcrowded, and the enrollment had reached its permanent capacity, and that we were going to be faced with needing to make a decision about how we were going to deal with that. We knew that the footprint had included a wing to be built at a future date. We also knew that in other buildings around the district, when they needed another classroom, we would make provisions to secure a portable, move a portable in, and put that in place. If they had infrastructure in place, that's very simple to do, and you have the cost of the portable, and we do that all the time. If there is an infrastructure, that's a much different investment. It's a capital investment, and we don't just typically do that as a routine. That is something that comes back to the board. Case in point, Grassy Lake Elementary School. We had been through this a number of years ago. Right or wrong, agree or disagree, we've been through that. And in that particular case, we chose not to build a wing, but to install portables that became a permanent, as opposed to really doing a big major attendance boundary. We did tweak it a little bit, but we did not do a major attendance boundary. We did some tweaks because there was a charter school involved and so forth and so on. So that fast forward to Lake Mineola. We made a decision to have an ABC committee to go and look at certain things, and we gave them certain parameters. One, they needed to relieve the overcrowding at Lake Mineola. They needed to fill and utilize the capacity that was available at a neighboring school. Portables were not up for discussion because we did not have the capital dollars to be expended in that way. So portables was not on the table for their discussion. And frankly, in our world, we made the decision to do the ABC route as opposed to just adding portable after portable after portable on a new school, because at that point in time we had worked through our capital plan and we had some other priorities that, because those capital dollars were so finite. Okay? So that's how we got to an ABC committee review in the first place, that portables were not an option at that point in time. So thus the ABC committee came together. We had the appointees. They worked for several months, and they came up with their recommendation. So we come to the table. Option 8 comes. It gets tentative approval. Now, mind you, there is no option that is a good option because somebody is being moved in any option. So we all know that ABC committee recommendations are a tough thing for anybody to do. But portables were not being discussed at this point in time in any capacity. However, the principal still had to deal with more students than she had permanent capacity. And Ms. Shepard, being a very good high school principal, understanding space, understanding the capacity of staff, she actually has utilized other types of strategies, i.e. floating teachers, using resource classroom space for regular classroom space, looking at master scheduling and designing electives that could hold larger number of student volume, if you will, increased numbers in certain electives that were non-class size related. So she has utilized all those other, what we call temporary strategies, to be able to handle the students that have walked through her doors. But those strategies of floating teachers and using resource in every little space available and increased numbers are meant to be short-term things until you make decisions, either build a wing, open a new school, or do attendance boundaries. In this particular case, the attendance boundary process. So for her to do those things long-term is really not an option because there are programmatic implications that is an adverse impact. But right now, that's where I want, there were some comments made that we saw out and about that that the staff had not been transparent with the board about the use of portables and the need for portables right now. And I want to clarify that because that was not the staff not being transparent. It's just that the decision was made to do an attendance boundary process, not to put portables on, but in the meantime the principals had to make some local decisions on floating teachers and so forth. But for that to be a long-term fix, that's, you know, so everything that you have before you that has been a recommendation of the Attendance Boundary Committee was with the understanding that there would be attendance boundary, and in the meantime, because that was a grandfathering in recommendation, that was a slow transition to ramp up, that the understanding was that the principal would still float teachers and still use every space and not adding portables. Now, that doesn't mean that this board, with any option, could go back and say, we don't want teachers to float. We don't want to use resource space that way. We want to invest in portables. You have the right to make those decisions. But I want you to know that if you choose to do that, that's fine, not a problem. But that was not availed to the ABC committee. So I don't want them to be criticized unfairly for that reason. So I need to clarify that. So we had a request to look at a different boundary, which has now been done by staff at the request of board members, and so that's why you have option 12. We also had a request that if we are looking at any attendance boundary, that we look at it in two ways, grandfathering and non-grandfathering. So we've had the requests of all of that from any one or multiple of you, of staff, and so the staff right now is prepared to give you all that information that all of you have asked for, so you're all getting it at the same time. We are not going to be giving any judgment statements or trying to sway you one way or the other. We are just presenting the information that was presented to you, that was asked by one or several of you. So what I've asked staff to do, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fix to come forward, he is going to show you for everybody's edification, the map for option 8 to remind you, you have the chart. He's going to then show you the map for option 12, so you can see the differences and you have the charts. Then Mr. Davis has gone back and he has done some comparisons, because we did have a request to try and have on a summary chart of what are the comparisons of 8, current, 12, with grandfathering, without grandfathering, what are the costs associated if portables are involved, transportation, all of that. So we have on board docs one document that has multiple pages, and Mr. Davis will walk you through that. And again, no decision during this workshop time, because this is a public hearing later on in our next meeting.
Dr. Moxley, would you like for staff to do all their presentation and then we go back and ask questions, or stop in the middle?
It's your pleasure. They're prepared to some of it you already have, and the others on board docs. So it's whichever.
Well, I personally, as the chairman, would prefer that they give their presentation with answering all of our questions, and then we go back and ask our questions. Okay, let's go that way.
Good afternoon, Madam Superintendent, Madam Chair, and board members. First, I want to ask David back in the control room, is there a way to turn the map? And I don't see the map turning yet.
He's coming out.
I think you probably have to turn it.
If I turn it, well, it's awfully long, so it won't all show up. I can turn it, but
you may not. You may have to.
He can make it smaller. He can manipulate it.
Okay. The first map I put up there is just, oh, there it goes, the world's shrinking. All right, good. Since the superintendent first referenced option 8, I know you've seen it before, but I'll just put up the map there very quickly. This is option 8 that you've seen before. Of course, the green areas that you see on this map would be the areas under this option that would be reassigned from Lake Mineola High School to South Lake High School. And we've gone over that before, and you've had that option in front of you. I don't know to what degree you want me to go through that, and the only reason I say that is because we are going to be going through a comparison chart as well that has all that side by side. But just to suffice it to say, as the superintendent said, this was a recommendation of the ABC, and as she said, their focus was really, if you will, enrollment to capacity and looking out at growth and how that would be impacted. They were not given the option of looking at not only portables, Madam Superintendent, but also if there would be any switch in programs. That wasn't in their purview, or if we would do anything different with zone waivers than we had done in the past. It was certainly something that through the process we became more aware of, zone waivers, address issues, and so on. But once again, what wasn't in their purview, but as we went through the process, we became aware of some of those things. And then you all have worked on some policies as a result of that and tightening that up as well. The option 12 that we have here before you, once again, if you look at these areas in green, those would be the areas that would be under this option, reassigned from Lake Mineola High School to South Lake High School. This option, like option 8. Well, one of the differences between the two options is option 8, as the superintendent said, is a phase-in. Right now, option 12 is not as proposed, at least now, as a phase-in. It would be moving grades, the rising 9th grade, but grades 9 through 11 would move under this option. Of course, 12th graders, as part of your policy, always have that senior privilege, so they would get to stay. In the first year of of that change, it is not too dissimilar to option 8. In fact, the excess capacity of Lake Mineola High School, or excuse me, not its excess, but its overage in capacity drops to 204 in the first year. And then, as you can see, then 172, then 253. And the reason you say, well, why is it going back up? Because growth is starting to kick back in, and it will grow. And then the excess, or the overage in capacity in the fourth year, goes up to 284. So in the beginning, it's similar in relief, for the most part, as option 8, but then it continues, or when I say it, meaning Lake Mineola High School continues to grow, and so it starts picking back up again. And those are the two main differences of these options, the phase-in and the fact that while they both do pretty good, or similarly in their first couple of years, it's in the last couple of years that then growth starts taking off again and starting to chip away or negate at that relief. I don't know if there's any more detail to go into. The only other thing I would say is, and it's one of the last sheets of what you have that we'll go over, but we looked at ethnic makeup, and in all cases, ethnic makeup, unless you decide on some hard and fast percentages, all the percentages of option 8 or 12 are within 1 or 2% of each other. Across the board, so the ethnic makeup would not seem to be a determinant factor.
Mr. Fix, on the map that is showing here, just for reminding, can you point to, this is option 12 that is up here, can you point to the area that comes out, that is not included in option 12 that would have been included in option 8, and the area that is included in option 12 that was not in option 8, just so people...
You can put them side by side.
Here. I always wanted to see the back of that. All right. What we have here in option 8, what is not proposed, in option 12, what is not proposed for being moved would be the area just to the west of 27. So most of the areas of Mineola and also that eastern portion, if you will, of downtown Claremont would not be moved under this option. Now, under this option, you do have a part of the western part, if you will, of the downtown of Claremont that would be moved, as well as this area that starts going up here, Cherry Lakes, and coming around just north of 561A up here that would be moved. So the main difference is really in this area right here, just on the west side of 27.
Okay. Can I ask you a question here? If you're fixing to turn it over to Will, is that what you're fixing to do? Turn it over to Will. Arrow Tree, the subdivision on 19, north of 27 and the Turnpike. In 8, they are still within Lake Mineola High, correct?
Correct.
With 12, that makes that whole residential population go to South Lake, which, if my understanding from one of the parents at the original meeting came to, and they were told that they would not be affected by what was being proposed by the ABC, they would still go to Lake Mineola. However, 12 takes that whole subdivision without them knowing anything about this and puts it in 12, and puts it in South Lake, correct?
It would be proposed to be moved.
Okay. So my reason I bring that up is because in the other meetings where we've discussed this, we made it very clear we wanted the public to know what we were doing and to be transparent. That is a pretty big subdivision, has quite a few kids in it, and now they're going to be moved, and they have no inkling that that's going on. I just wanted you to be aware of that because I was made aware of it.
Okay, then at this time I'm going to ask Mr. Davis to come and walk through the costs that were associated with this, and then certainly...
Well, I was waiting,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
is it Harry, or I want to speak about these numbers for a minute on the population. So who is that?
Harry and...
So can I go ahead and ask
yeah.
those questions then?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to deal with with 12 here and with the geodata. So in the population projections, we are showing in 2017, 17 and 18 and 18, 19 are where, quite honestly, the wheel runs off for me. So in the geodata, geodata shows Lake Mineola at 1890. And in your projections, you're showing 2088. So where are those projections coming from, Harry, in growth?
Geographically where?
However you want to explain it.
If we remember, and I have it here. It's not overlaid with the attendance boundaries, but when we think of Lake Mineola High School and its attendance boundary, remember that presently it comes down here to Highway 50. So it's all of this area, and all of this shaded in blue is Claremont that is presently in, and would be under all the options we looked at. This portion of Claremont stays within the Lake Mineola High School attendance boundary. While people have focused that Mineola doesn't have the number of permits going through as does maybe Groveland, the fact is Claremont has quite a bit of growth in this general area. And as these communities are starting to now have a little bit of age on them, we're getting more and more high school students coming from this area just south of the high school, north of Highway 50, but probably south of Old Highway 50, Washington.
But it would be conceivable that we would revisit, and while we have extra capacity at East Ridge, so that we could balance in another phase, moving to balance out that overcapacity at East Ridge as well, and maintain a more reasonable balance at Lake Mineola.
Well, one of the big concerns with the ABC is the amount of growth in Claremont, even then when you start looking south of 50, and that they felt that if they started putting students into East Ridge now, when we looked at the numbers, East Ridge High School itself is going to continue to grow and fill up. Now, the one, if I may, the one saving grace we have there is we have plenty of place to put portables, and we've had some experience putting portables there.
Well, we have 700 student stations at East Ridge right now, roughly, right? That was the last capacity I saw. And option 12 until year 3 doesn't begin to skew off like based on your projections. So it's conceivable that if you're seeing all of the growth, because we're not seeing it in Mineola in permits, and we are seeing it in Groveland that would support South Lake, and that's what keeps throwing me off. And if the projections then are for Claremont, then it's logical to me that this board could come back and realign to move to East Ridge that has capacity, still maintaining the equity and student stations between the 3 schools.
I would just caution the board if they went in that approach that Claremont still has quite a bit of area south of 50 also that is also building as well, so that that additional capacity will soon be taken up with the growth that will occur south of 50. We've got a lot of growth coming.
Right. No, I understand.
I think, Mr. Mathias, I think your logic of option 12 does address it for 2 years.
Yes.
The concern that could a board in 2 years come back and do a ABC and a rezoning and look at the whole south end of the county, absolutely you could.
I believe we're going to be looking at it regardless. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. And that 12 clearly moves more students and more FTEs to South Lake where they're needed. And then we're going to be into years 3 and 4, which for me is where...
I think what Mr. Fix is saying that I think is an important point to make sure is included when we talk about that is that if you're going to, in 2 years, say whatever plan we take, then if that is the plan that you come back in 2 years, you look at it, you're going to have to take in that data of that growth for East Ridge.
That's
not just the empty seats that are there,
100%.
but you're going to have to bring in all that research and that data too, or you'll have a skewed decision there. And I don't know what that's going to look like because we did not look at East Ridge.
That's exactly right.
In that context. That would be another variable added in.
I mean, we did initially, but initially it was
right.
such that it just didn't make sense.
Where the ABC was talking about 2 schools, not 3.
Initially 3, but as
right.
I said, looking at the growth, it didn't
right.
make sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Say, Harry, so I can go on to Will. Mr. Davis?
The information that you have in front of you is identically the same. There you go. Thanks, David. Is essentially identically the same information that Harry's presented in the other forums. All we've attempted to do is the team put together, based on the comments from the last board meeting, that they wanted the information in a way that could be easily compared. So what we've done is we've taken the 4 elements of the existing 8 and the 2 options for 12 and placed them in identically the same format on the same page. That's all this is. So if we look at the next sheet, which is sheet 2, what we've done is we've basically turned the X and the Y axis around so that it becomes a little bit easier to be able to compare in a vertical sense. As you see, the green area, which relates to South Lake and Mineola, without any adjustments. Then you have that red next 2 columns, which is column 3 and column 4, looking at the proposed option 8. And then the 2 proposals in option 12. The first 2 columns there on that last 4 is related to those existing students being grandfathered, and then the last 2 are the ones with the existing students not being grandfathered. So, and what you see is you see the same portable capacity, the same enrollment, and as it moves down from the top to the bottom of the sheet, we're gaining in years between the 2014, which is the current 14-15, and then the last row is the projected enrollment as of 18-19.
And if I can interject here while he's changing screens, you'll notice that the ABC looked at it over the course of 4 years.
That's correct.
And at the end of the 4 years. And because they had the emphasis on the grandfathering in, you're ramping up each year. Another approach in one of the other options looks at it from an immediate reduction, maxing out in 2 years. So again, neither right, neither wrong. It's just how, what time do you want to be back at the table in your approach, and it's a philosophical approach. And so what we're just attempting to do is show that in an easy way that you can see it on one page, not making a judgment statement at this point.
What you see here in this chart is identically the same information that was presented in the 2 other tables. What you have is this is not related to the total student population, but it tries to relate it in terms of over, under existing capacity, which is what we had attempted to do in the previous sets of numeric tables. So what you have is I have these 5 vertical area here, 5 columns. I've got a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. The first column of 4 proposals is essentially the current 14-15 school year. And of course, there is no change in any proposal because there is no proposed change that was to occur this year. And so what you see is 672 in available stations at South Lake High versus the 290 over capacity at Lake Mineola. So if you go to that second tier, that second column, that's essentially looking at the capacity as it relates to next school year, the 15-16 school year. And what you'll see based on the proposals, that first column of the column 2 is the basically do nothing. And you'll see that there's a slight change in population as it relates to South Lake, going from 672 to 652, but there's a slight increase going from 290 to 356 over capacity in the very following year. Again, that's assuming that we do nothing. We're just showing the change over time, and if you look at the columns 3, 4, and 5, you'll see that goes from 290 to 449 over that period of 4 years. So the second column in that group for each of those successive years is option 8. So if you're looking at the kind of the gray column and this mustard, so to speak, you can see with option 8, it's reducing it from 672 to 542 at South Lake, and it's reducing it from 290 to 246 at Lake Mineola. The next column is basically the option 12 without the grandfathering. Again, it's going from 672 to 612 at South Lake, and the 290 to 316.
That's with grandfathering.
That's with grandfathering.
That is with grandfathering.
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's without grandfathering.
No, it's with.
That's with.
Oh, I'm sorry, that is,
that's
you're right.
with,
That is with
that's with.
grandfathering.
The last one.
The last
yeah.
one is with. So if you take that, then you can see the changes over time as it relates to where we are today and where we are. The ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve is to put both schools at equal capacity over their permanent capacity, and the goal would be to achieve both the top one coming down and the bottom one coming up and approaching zero would be the ideal situation in this case. So sheet 4 is a culmination of in the top yellow bar at the top of the sheet. Thank you, David. You have again 4 columns representing the current option 8 with grandfathering, option 12 without grandfathering, and then option 12 with grandfathering in each of those 3 columns. Thanks, Sarah. And you'll see each year, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth year, the populations are in that yellow bar across the first row at the top. Then what you have for each is a pro and a con of some of the advantages and disadvantages that staff walk through in order to kind of look at, well, what are the benefits of this particular option as it relates to the other options, and what are the cons that relate to the other options. And so you see those pros and cons for each of those 4 categories. In the blue item at the bottom, that blue row at the bottom, for each one of those, we've tried to calculate the cost for transportation for each year and the culmination cost of transportation for the total of the 4 years. And we've also included, if there was any infrastructure cost as part of that, we've included that by year and shown that as a total cost. There's a caveat at the bottom with a note indicating that the total that you see, for instance, on the first column where you have the 16,490, that represents us with the possibility that we could take 11 of those, take the portables that we currently have at Humanities. As you know, when we presented on the 23rd, we showed you that there's a significant lease cost from what we are currently under lease for now as compared to if we started a brand new lease and started over. That second item is if we were leasing from scratch. So I wanted to include that, and that's just a notation that if for some reason there's been a lot of discussion that these portables at Humanities are going to be needed for some potential growth that's occurring in terms of the closure of humanities and the closure of milestones, which hasn't been part of the discussion for the board in terms of this aspect. But the unique thing about those portables is that they do have a single restroom in it, which would be ideal for the elementary school level and not necessarily an asset for the high school level. So I did want to include both of those in there. And as you see for each one of those, again, it breaks out the transportation cost and any infrastructure cost that's part of that process. As you can see from this table, we had no planned infrastructure cost for option 8 with the grandfathering. We had no planned infrastructure cost for option 12 without the grandfathering, and we did need to incorporate with the grandfathering in the last column because we had overcapacity over the current 290 students that Ms. Shepard-Miller has already been able to take care of, and we needed 2 portables for that, and that's the cost that you're seeing there.
Before you move on,
yes,
though, I want to emphasize again something I earlier said, that when you look at option 8, you're not seeing a cost for infrastructure because that's making the assumption that because that recommendation came assuming that she would still continue philosophically to float teachers and use every available resource space that she had possible, and with some larger numbers in elective classes. Because those were the parameters that the ABC committee had to operate from. So those assumptions, we've been very consistent there. If this board decided you did not want to do that, then that would be a change in the variable that was given to them, but we've tried to be very consistent and not to change the variables midstream as it pertains to option 8, because they did not. That was how that recommendation came. But as a board, if you're saying no, if we don't want to think of it that way, that's fine. But I, again, want to reiterate that was not given to the ABC committee, so I want to be very clear the assumptions as these numbers are put out here. Now, with the option 12 with grandfathering, meaning you're going to ramp that up, because we were asked to do it that way, we did include portables because you're not ramping up fast enough that it exceeds what she currently has been able to accomplish with floating teachers. She cannot float any more teachers, so we are at capacity there. So if we go one classroom more than what she currently is doing right now this minute, then we've got to have another discussion. So that's why you're going to see portables on that one.
But on the portable discussion, on November the 10th of 2014, there was a discussion with the ABC committee where it was clearly stated by Mr. Fix that a phase-in approach would not reach the district goals. So should we not have been presenting what is reasonable as far as portables? Because the fact that Mrs. Shepard has been creative, I think was a word that was used, and is that in the best interest of our students? And what is the real portable number that would be needed?
Well, and that is a discussion that can be had.
I'm sorry, an 8 or 12 is going to require, they're almost the same.
Well, and that is a discussion that needs to be had in that context because, in a textbook scenario, and we do have recommended levels of service, if you will. If you think about it, here's a recommended level of service, and that's what we use with any school in our district. For example, Leesburg Elementary, just for example's sake, not to take it off of the discussion that we have here, they will need consideration for portables because of the factor that has happened now. We've had a change in condition because of the closing of 2 charter schools. So that's a level of service that we have to look at. There is the optimum. In a perfect world, you would have this. But because our capital dollars are so scarce, they may have to do a combination because they may, in an optimum world, and I'm picking a number just out of the hat for easy example's sake, 10, but if we can only afford 8, then they have to we may do a combination of things. I think that example holds true in this one as well, that yes, That is something we could have looked at in November if we were choosing to do that, but because we were in the middle of an ABC boundary change, that had not come forth. That discussion did not go further. But yes, it could have.
Roseanne?
So with what you just shared, because in this example, we were saying that we would possibly take the portables from humanities to take down to Lake Mineola. But we're probably going to need those portables to go over to Leesburg Elementary because they're already equipped for elementary school age children. So which actually will change the number here out of this equation.
No, it's got
That is why we...
Well, I know there's two, but there's one saying if we move the portables, so that we can't, well, that we probably would not be able to do because we will need to move those to another elementary school. So then we would be looking at the higher number for putting in portables at Lake Mineola.
More than likely, yes. The reason I asked Mr. Davis to put both numbers there was to make sure we were 100% transparent with this board. You had all the different scenarios because there are X number of portables at the humanities for use. We have a greater need for portables than we have at Lake Mineola. So either way, we're going to use the ones at Lake Mineola or at the humanities, and we're still going to need. So which ones go to which campus remains to be determined, but the ones at the humanities do have bathrooms. Those are more conducive for elementary, so that's why we put both there. So, or it could be a combination of both.
You're absolutely correct, and that when Mr. Davis and I spoke, he said he had requests for 25 portables throughout the district, right? So when I put together the number for the board that I handed out, I used the new number. I did not use the lower one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's 25 without Lake Mineola.
And I think that if, in fact, we're going to, and I don't know what short-term is and long-term in our world, but 2 years is long-term to me, and that means that we need to be fixing, in either scenario, 8 or 12, we're going to need more than one portable, in my opinion, if we're going to improve the quality of the environment for our students. But what is that number? Is it 10?
12.
I mean, 10 mathematically.
12 would be, if you take the 290 that she's currently over in excess right now, that would be 12.
Not now. She's going to drop down to, I thought it was right at 10, when on option 12.
Well,
The point is,
I
we're
think
still going to have to buy portables.
That's where we're
That's
going.
the point.
That's my point.
It doesn't matter how many, we're going to have to do it.
Which then, on top of the transportation of 212.
if you want to address the fact that she's not floating teachers and using resource space for classroom space, then yes, the other alternative to answer that question is to do portables or get the building built.
But for me, because I don't live in your world, I don't know at what point is floating the teacher impacting the student's education. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Okay.
The rest of the backup information is basically backup documentation. I'll be glad to go through it if you like. It's just highlighting essentially the values that you're seeing on the blue row at the bottom of the page as it relates to transportation and the portables. But if you'd like, I'll be glad to walk through that. But it's just the backup documentation that relates to how we came up with those individual infrastructure and transportation costs.
Well, I think we do need you to walk through that, if you
Okay.
would, please.
So if you go to page 5, what it does is it's essentially, this is the sheet that you saw once before with option 8. It shows the phasing in over time, where we're talking about 2 additional buses next year, 3 additional buses in the second year, and then 2 additional buses for the third year, giving us a total cost of $212,000 to do the transportation as part of that, which includes the labor and operational cost for those students. If you look at page 6, this is associated with option 12 without the grandfathering. It basically runs through that process, showing essentially those 12th graders in that first year is a one-time cost of $35,955, and then what you see is a reoccurring cost for each year after that because of the additional mileage and time that we're required to do as part of kind of moving back towards Lake Apopka, and that is related to the additional $45,000 for each additional, or $45,000 that first year, and then $11,250 for each reoccurring year. If you look at page 7, what you see there is essentially option 12 with the grandfathering. And again, it's the related cost for that is $225,000 for those 3 years. Again, it's 232, the same number of buses, but because we've got additional time and additional distance involved, there's a little bit more expense. When we get into that rural area north of 561, there are a few kids, but the problem is that we're traveling, and it's more of a timing issue than it is anything else. We go to page 8. What you see is essentially and again, this makes the assumption that the superintendent indicated to you. We're taking the basis from where we're starting with additional portables at the 200, anything above her existing 290, which she's already making allowances for. So at this point, this would be based on today. If you were trying to make a decision at the beginning of this school year to decide on how many portables she would need, we'd be looking at about 7 units for that next year.
At a cost of what, Will?
That cost would be $427,000 for the first year, and then about $83,000 for each reoccurring year based on not leasing the humanities portables. If we go to the last option that you saw in that one table, which represents the option 12 grandfathering, as you know, there's a ramp up in the initial with not being able to draw the students down quite as quickly in the front end. So we're going to need 2 additional portables there to handle that. And after that 3rd year, really, we could probably get rid of them because we probably wouldn't need them. But we all know that when portables go in, or relocatables go in, they don't come out. So that's a total cost of $108,400 for the first year and about $20,000 for each recurring.
And again, that's on the assumption of that she's still doing those other kinds of strategies. Going back to Mr. Mathias's point, is that if you want to eliminate or reduce that, then the numbers of portables would go up to 10, 12, or even more than that, depending on which option.
Put that spreadsheet you had that had the 400,000, because I thought that was for 10. Whoops. You heard me.
You're talking about the 7 or the 2 units?
Yeah, you have your quantity of 1.
That's just the cost. That's the cost per 1 unit, and then if you take that out times 12 months, it's 16.
Oh, 7 down here. Got it.
16.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry, 58,380. If you're.
Got it. Thank you.
I mean, I have the cost broken down for 10 or 12 units if you need that.
Because that's why I thought we had 10 one time.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, when we presented to the board we had 10 units. 10 units related. If we did go back out for new leases, that was $598,340 for the first year. That's all the infrastructure cost to put in the 10 units, and then it would be about $113,000 for a reoccurring lease for those 10 units.
And see, that's been the problem. All these numbers are flying from all the different meetings, from all the different options, and we need to decide, we need to land on something and decide what it's going to be. Stephanie, did I see you want to say something?
I did. I was going to ask, if we were to decide that we wanted to put in portables next year because we want to alleviate the situation at Lake Mineola, regardless of which option is chosen, what would come off the 5-year plan? Where's that coming out of? What would be postponed that we have planned as a result of that funding?
I can't answer that specifically for you tonight because there are a variety of choices that
we would have to choose what to take off.
We would go back at another workshop, bring back the capital plan with some, and we'd lay that out for you, and we'd say, okay, here are the non-negotiables, meaning these are things we have to do. Then you're going to have, then you would look at it and make decisions about, okay, you have a transportation audit that says we should be buying 40 buses to get those expenditures. So is that a decision that you're going to spend $4 million for 40 buses? Or are you going to spend X number
Right.
for portables, or are you going to spend X number for a wing or X number for technology? Those are decisions that you'd have to make. So you'd have to go back and do a reprioritization.
Yeah, currently, I believe in the 5-year plan, the only capital monies that we have were for Cypress Ridge and cafeteria. Isn't that correct, Harry? That we have for...
Well, you have some in
Well,
land.
I mean, there's some
Actually,
additional, but I mean, that's the only thing from a capital
From
building,
bricks
and mortar.
but,
Yes.
The superintendent was more comprehensive, because remember, the capital plan includes all those.
Includes all of
things.
them.
Right.
But I just have to say that what goes through my mind is when we're working miracles, and what does that look like for me? And I remember when we speak about that Mrs. Shepherd's working miracles
Oh.
and being creative, what does that look like? And in the early 2000s, when my oldest son was at Leesburg High School, I went into an art class that had 50 kids, and they were sitting on the windowsills. That's what goes through my head. So if that's what our kids are experiencing, I don't care. I mean, we're going to have to add portables, folks, either way, and we ought to just be prepared for that.
I think what...
If that's what it is.
Yes, and I will tell you that there may be 1 or 2 instances with a physical education class that has larger numbers in it. But I also know she is looking at programs that have been running with very small numbers and looking at combining or reducing, because if they're only operating with 10 or 12 students in it and they're in a big classroom, well, then they may need, either the program doesn't need to be offered because there's not enough interest and that space be repurposed, or maybe they need to be in a resource room and that class be used for a larger classroom to accommodate a greater number of students. And then she brought in her a master plan or master schedule, and we saw she is floating at least 1 or 2 teachers in each core academic area. So she's turning those classrooms over. She can't float any more teachers, because if she floated them, there's no place to put them. So she's maximizing using, meaning there's not a period in a core class where a classroom's sitting empty to be used. So that's why I said she's maximized her floating teachers, and every high school and middle school has a floating teacher, 1 or 2.
But does 8 and 12 relieve that? And 12 being more students actually than 8 the first year, does it then take the pressure off where she has classroom space available?
8 and 12 relieve that to a certain extent. But in both of them, you'd still have some of it. It doesn't eliminate it. It relieves it, I think is a good word to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Will, can you do page 10? I think that's the last one you had.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And Harry spoke of this when he was up here. You wanted the ethnicity breakdown between the 2 schools. These are the geocoded students that relate to that, and Harry can speak in a little greater detail if you have any questions.
All right.
Well, and as Harry's coming up, we talked at length about this. Geocoded, this is current as we know right now. This does not estimate growth, because we have no way of we can estimate numbers, but you cannot estimate this. So this is actual as it is right now. And that's why up at the top you're going to see geocoded students as of October 20th, which was an FTE window.
And the other thing is because one option option 8's a phase, and the other is moving 9 through 11, we just went out to then year 18, 19 and took a snapshot there, because otherwise it wouldn't be quite as good of a comparison. So if you look at option 8 or option 12 and those in the 18, 19 versus the current attendance boundary, which is that third box at the bottom, you can see the percentages are only moving back and forth 1% or so. And bear in mind, this went down to the 100th place. So, for example, when we have 55.48, that's 50. Normally, you would round that to 55%, or in this instance, so we've got it all the way down to the hundreds, and we left that there just so it wouldn't look like we were rounding up one way or the other. And
it appears it's basically even.
home.
Not even exactly even,
having worked
but
in a district where they had to focus on this because of issues with Office of Civil Rights,
right.
This would be very acceptable in those situations where you're only looking at 1 or 2 percentages.
Anybody have any questions? Great information, and I want to thank staff for putting page numbers on them. It does help us if you have the page number on them.
That was Will.
Because all these, I know Will, he knows it. All these charts, they're all beginning to look alike.
Mrs. Stevender.
Yes, ma'am.
We were asked one other question when we were over at the Public Safety Complex. We were asked that, and this was when option 8 was being discussed, we asked if the students that were rising 9th graders that would be rezoned to South Lake, how many students would be impacted that had a older brother or sister that would be grandfathered in at Lake Mineola. We went and pulled the geocoding students and looked at students that were rising 9th graders, meaning their current 8th graders, and the way we were able to do that is students that shared the same address. So that means they could be stepbrothers, stepsisters, they could be a cousin living in the same household. We don't know. We could not discern that. Am I correct with that, Harry?
That is correct, because sometimes, in fact, the last names were different.
There are, as of March 17, 2015, we were able to identify 25 8th grade students who share an address with a student who would qualify to remain at Lake Mineola High School under the proposed phase-in of option 8. And I believe, Ms. Brandenburg, you asked us for that number. So we wanted to make sure that we...
So you're talking about an additional 25 students.
We're talking about 25 students in option 8 that would be rezoned to South Lake that share the same address of a
Mineola one.
Current 10th, 11th, or rising 10th, 11th, and 12th grader that would be grandfathered in.
Current for next year.
Current for next year, yeah. Meaning they're 9th, 10th, and 11th graders this year.
Right. Because there were a few associated with the 12th grade that we didn't count
that
number because they would have graduated.
Right. And so there wouldn't be that conflict.
Okay. That answered what you needed? Okay.
But frankly, those 25 are in 2 different schools right now because one's at a middle school and one's at Lake Mineola, so...
Okay, I've got, I was married to a historian, so I do it too sometimes. I'm going to give you an article from August 10th, 1985 for y'all to read.
Is that Anna Peck?
No.
Oh, okay.
This was back in the day when Anna Cowan was actually a school board member, and she was designated to do an article in the paper every day, in the Commercial and the Eustis News and the Tavares. If you go down to the line where I've got it highlighted, in other business, the Lake County School Board approved the boundary change for students attending Claremont Elementary School and Mineola Elementary School. For about a decade, some students would attend Claremont Elementary from kindergarten through 4th grade. Then they would be transferred to Mineola Elementary for the 5th grade, then to be returned to Claremont for middle school. As a result of the board tentative action pending public hearing, students east of Highway 27, including the Grandview Apartment Complex, will attend Mineola for grades kindergarten through 5th, and you can read the rest of it. I just wanted to show you that 30 years ago they were doing the same thing in the same area with the same road and the 3 cities down there. Just good for history. Dr. Moxley.
That's the information that we were asked to gather with regards to the attendance boundary decision that you have before you tonight. If there are any questions, we are happy to answer those. If you want us to go back to any of those charts and explain, we are happy to do that. Being a workshop setting, we want to make sure that you have everything clarified going into tonight and that all board members have exactly the same thing that was asked by other board members, that you're all have all that information tonight. And we wanted to be very transparent about how we got our numbers and what those calculations,
and what assumptions that are made. It's like any algebraic formula. If you change the variable or you introduce a new variable, then or you change the parameters, then that will change, the data set that is included with those parameters. And so we want to make sure that you have everything before you tonight as you are moving into the final hearing or a hearing.
The only thing that I had asked is option 12 produced 42 more students moving to South Lake than option 8 in the first year.
Correct.
I had asked whether or not we could get a feel for students that were in programs that could be given a waiver to stay, what that number would look like.
Okay. Okay, that one
If
I
that's
don't know about.
And
Okay.
If they were in a career tech?
or any program, and that would be kind of the wiggle room. So I don't see Dr. Christensen here.
I'd have to, what I would have, I'm sorry, I was not aware of that question. What we would need to do in that situation is we'd need to identify the 42 students, go run their schedule to see if they're in any particular program.
But I'm not saying that it's 42. I'm saying we have 42 more.
Right.
We have 42 more
Right.
students being moved
Right.
than option 8.
Right.
And how many would we have to subtract from that 42
Right.
if students are in a program that will not be offered? And I think where it gets a little complicated is with the FTE move to South Lake, you're going to be adding programs.
Right. Yes.
So,
Yes.
so it's conceivable that we will be offering and not need to.
Right. What we would have to do is identify who those 42 students are and look to see what programs they're currently in.
And is it going to be
then-
offered?
And make a decision. If it's an AP program, those are fairly easy to resolve. If it's a specific career and tech ed program, if it's lab specific, that would not be easy to resolve. One of the things that, and I'll go ahead and share this now, a couple items that have come up that have come out through this process, kind of uniquely. One, we have already talked with Mr. McHugh about they were right on the bubble this current year of earning a 4th guidance counselor. This board, earlier in this school year, went ahead and let them have that 4th. So they got the 4th. We costed that and built that in and added that into the budget. Next year going in, even if you didn't do an attendance boundary, they are at enough growth that they will have earned that 4th. So they have earned enough to keep that 4th guidance counselor. So the question came up of, one, career and tech ed programs and developing those, and foreign language. Those were the two things that came up. And I have already said we needed to plan to give them an additional career and tech ed and an additional foreign language unit so they could go ahead and already do the survey. One of the things that we had talked about was because of the global, Mandarin Chinese is a global foreign language, that certainly would be a possibility. The other one that was explored was Latin, and of course we'd want to survey the needs of students in that, and I know they've been doing some informal surveying. The other areas for career and tech ed that we are exploring at this point in time is obviously one of the ones that is most popular in demand is the robotics and looking at a STEM. The other one is the GIS because of the easeability in replicating that program and because we don't have that offered anywhere else, and that one is the next one slated to come online. That might be a magnet type concept that could be explored. So those are things that are currently being discussed. We have not landed on a decision on that, but certainly working with the principal on that. So again, those are all factored into allocations for next year, regardless of what the decision is here. If the decision is made to go with 8 or 12, obviously you're moving more students, then there will be the corresponding teachers that go along with that, because the foreign language and the CTE, those are more elective, and the foreign language can be a graduation requirement depending on what area the student is pursuing. But core teachers, there would be the corresponding teachers that would be added based on the number of students that were being moved. So all those things are being looked at.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else? Sorry, Natalie. We will adjourn this meeting.